Have you ever watched a seasoned executive perform a magic trick so perfectly constructed that the audience applauds the illusion before realizing the magician just made their own wallet disappear? Because the Sports Illustrated blueprint sitting on our dissection table today contains a genuinely brilliant corporate maneuver buried inside a transaction that simultaneously raises serious questions about whether the incoming asset represents a solution or an expensive, high-ceiling gamble that could detonate inside the most critical position room on a Super Bowl contending roster. The doors to our intelligence center are sealed at maximum security. The quarterback evaluation databases are running at full analytical capacity. The draft value charts are illuminated across every available monitor. And we are about to conduct the most comprehensive, most financially precise forensic audit of this Mac Jones extraction proposal that this platform has ever produced. Because the outbound side of this transaction represents a genuine masterclass in asset monetization, while the inbound side demands a kind of rigorous, unsentimental medical and developmental examination that the mainstream coverage has almost entirely avoided. Let us begin by establishing the unfiltered corporate reality of what John Lynch has accomplished with Mac Jones, because the rehabilitation narrative deserves its full, honest accounting before we evaluate the extraction strategy. Jones arrived in Santa Clara as a thoroughly discredited asset, a former first-round pick whose professional reputation had been systematically dismantled by his experience in New England, a quarterback whose processing limitations, arm strength concerns, and inability to perform under sustained competitive pressure had convinced the broader analytical community that his NFL ceiling was definitively capped below the starting quarterback threshold. What Kyle Shanahan did with that discredited asset represents one of the most efficient quarterback rehabilitation operations in recent league memory. The outside zone system, the pre-snap motion principles, the route combination design that generates natural separation before the ball is even snapped, the quick game emphasis that gets the football out of the quarterback's hand before defensive pressure can disrupt the mechanical throwing process. All of these elements collectively create an environment where Jones' specific skill set, his game management intelligence, his short and intermediate accuracy, his ability to execute predetermined reads without requiring the kind of full-field processing that had exposed his limitations in New England, could generate genuine, competitive, winning-level production. The 5-3 record, the 13 touchdowns against 6 interceptions, the 97.4 passer rating across 8 starts. These numbers are real, and they're the direct product of placing the right quarterback in the right system at the right moment. But here is the critical distinction that separates elite asset management thinking from emotional attachment to a feel-good narrative. The production that Jones generated inside Shanahan's system is not fully portable. It is not a universal demonstration of quarterback capability that translates automatically and completely to any offensive environment. It is a system-specific performance that reflects the extraordinary intelligence and design sophistication of Shanahan's offensive architecture, as much as it reflects Jones's individual quarterbacking talent. And this distinction is absolutely central to understanding why the extraction window is genuinely real, why the market valuation of Jones is currently operating at an artificial peak that will not be sustained indefinitely, and why Lynch must act with decisive urgency before that peak begins its inevitable decline. Mac Jones is an impending free agent. The contractual mathematics are unforgiving in their clarity. If Lynch retains Jones through the entire 2026 season without executing a trade, Jones walks into unrestricted free agency, and San Francisco receives nothing beyond a compensatory pick that arrives years later, carrying a fraction of the value of an immediate second or third round selection. The rehabilitation investment, the system installation costs, the coaching resources, the practice repetitions, the organizational attention. All of it generates zero financial return if the asset is simply allowed to expire at the conclusion of his contract term. This is not a theoretical concern. It is an organizational certainty unless Lynch acts within the current market window when Jones's perceived value is elevated by the statistical evidence of recent competitive performance. The second-round pick demand that the report identifies as San Francisco's opening position is precisely what it should be interpreted as: a deliberate, calculated executive bluff designed to establish maximum leverage at the beginning of a negotiation rather than a genuine expectation of the final settlement price. Experienced general managers understand that opening positions in trade negotiations are performance art, projections of organizational confidence designed to shift the psychological framing of the conversation in the demanding party's favor. Lynch knows the actual clearing price for a backup quarterback entering the final year of his contract, even one with a recent winning record, is not a second-round pick in the current market. But by establishing that anchor, he influences the trajectory of the negotiation and ensures that whatever compromise price is eventually reached will be higher than it would have been had San Francisco opened with a more modest demand. Settling for a fourth-round pick in JJ McCarthy as the final transaction structure, if that is indeed where the negotiation lands, is not a concession from weakness. It is the execution of a precisely calibrated asset maximization strategy that converts an expiring liability into a combination of immediate draft capital and a high-ceiling developmental quarterback still operating under the cost-controlled terms of a rookie contract. The fourth-round pick alone would represent a meaningful return on the rehabilitation investment. The addition of McCarthy transforms the transaction into something with potentially far more significant long-term organizational impact, provided that the developmental assessment of the incoming asset is conducted with complete, unsentimental honesty. And this is where our war room must apply the most rigorous, most unsparing analytical standards we possess, because the JJ McCarthy dimension of this transaction is where the genuine complexity and the genuine risk of this entire proposal resides. The mainstream coverage of this trade has been almost uniformly uncritical in its acceptance of the Shanahan Rehabilitation Clinic narrative, embracing the point that Shanahan's system can fix whatever developmental deficiencies caused McCarthy's comprehensive failure in Minnesota, without adequately examining the specific nature of those deficiencies and whether they are actually addressable through system change alone. McCarthy was a 10th overall pick in his draft class, a selection that represented an organizational declaration of absolute conviction about his franchise quarterback potential. He was not placed into a developmental wasteland with inadequate supporting talent and a coaching staff still constructing a defensive identity. He was inserted into one of the most quarterback-friendly environments in the entire National Football League, surrounded by elite skill position talent anchored by Justin Jefferson, operating within Kevin O'Connell's sophisticated offensive system, and supported by an organizational infrastructure specifically designed to accelerate young quarterback development. The failure that occurred within that maximally supportive environment is the central diagnostic data point that any honest evaluation of McCarthy's developmental ceiling must confront directly. The critical question that separates the Shanahan rehabilitation optimism from genuine analytical rigor is whether McCarthy's processing failures in Minnesota were environmental in origin or structural. Environmental failures occur when a talented player is misdeployed, placed in the wrong system, surrounded by inadequate talent, or coached in ways that actively suppress rather than develop his natural capabilities. Environmental failures respond to system change because the underlying talent is genuine and the suppressive conditions are removable. Structural failures occur when the fundamental cognitive or physical limitations of a player are exposed by competitive NFL environments regardless of the surrounding support system, when the processing speed, the decision-making architecture, or the mechanical foundation simply does not meet the demands of the position at the professional level. The honest answer is that the available evidence does not definitively resolve this question in either direction, and that ambiguity is precisely what makes a McCarthy acquisition both potentially brilliant and genuinely risky simultaneously. The optimistic case rests on Shanahan's documented history of simplifying quarterback decision-making through pre-snap manipulation and predetermined read progressions that reduce the cognitive processing burden on the signal caller, creating an environment where a quarterback with McCarthy's physical tools might succeed precisely because the system asks him to do less thinking and more executing. The pessimistic case rests on the reality that O'Connell's system in Minnesota incorporated many of these same design principles, that Jefferson's presence should have made the environment even more forgiving than Shanahan's, and that McCarthy's struggles persisted despite these advantages in ways that suggest the limitations may be more structural than environmental. What is unambiguously true, and what represents a genuine organizational wisdom embedded in this transaction, is that acquiring McCarthy on a rookie contract creates a risk profile that is entirely manageable within a framework of championship roster construction. San Francisco is not committing $50 million annually to a developmental project with an uncertain ceiling. They are acquiring a 23-year-old former first-round pick with legitimate physical tools at a cost-controlled price point that allows the organization to evaluate his developmental response to Shanahan's system without jeopardizing the financial architecture required to sustain the championship roster. If McCarthy responds to the system change and demonstrates genuine improvement in his processing and decision-making under Shanahan's coaching, the organizational upside is enormous. If his limitations prove structural and unresponsive to the system adjustment, the financial consequences are minimal and the roster impact is contained. The Minnesota Vikings' motivation for accepting this trade structure, as the analysis correctly identifies, reflects a genuine organizational crisis at the quarterback position that has transformed a team with championship aspirations into an entity willing to accept significant losses on a prior investment simply to stabilize the present. Surrendering a fourth-round pick alongside McCarthy to acquire Jones confirms that the Vikings coaching staff is operating under the kind of win-now mandate that compresses decision-making timelines and forces organizations to prioritize immediate floor over long-term ceiling. Jones provides a known, verified, system-tested floor that McCarthy has failed to establish in Minnesota, and the Vikings are apparently willing to pay a meaningful premium to access that certainty. The executive verdict from our war room is delivered with complete analytical conviction. If Lynch executes this transaction at the reported terms, it represents one of the most efficient marginal trades the organization has conducted in recent memory. The outbound side is a flawless monetization of a peak value asset that would otherwise generate zero return. The inbound side is a calculated, risk-managed developmental gamble on a high-ceiling young quarterback whose failure in Minnesota may reflect environmental factors that Shanahan's specific system can address, acquired at a cost-controlled price point that protects the franchise's financial architecture regardless of the developmental outcome. This is not a guaranteed win. It is a precisely calibrated corporate maneuver that maximizes return on a depreciating asset while simultaneously acquiring optionality at the most important position in professional sports at a price point that the championship roster's financial constraints can comfortably absorb. John Lynch has identified the exact moment when the market perception of Mac Jones exceeds his actual organizational value to San Francisco, and he is executing the extraction with the cold, disciplined precision that distinguishes elite general managers from those who confuse asset attachment with asset management. Flood those comments with your completely unfiltered executive verdict right now. Does the McCarthy developmental upside justify the acquisition risk, or does his documented failure in the most supportive possible environment represent a structural limitation that no system change can resolve? Annihilate that like button to force the algorithm to deliver this level of analytically rigorous quarterback evaluation to every member of Niner Empire who demands more than surface-level trade reaction coverage. Lock in your subscription immediately because every transaction wire development, every quarterback room movement, and every front office calculation will be dissected in this war room with the precision